Welcome to 5 Good Minutes. You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Galatians with Kurt Bjorklund.
As we turn to Galatians 6, I want to just remind you of something I'm sure you know, and that is the original text of the Bible didn't have verses and numbers. It was written, verses and chapters, it was written as a paragraph or a letter. So, for example, Galatians was written as a letter, meaning there's no break in chapter 6 from chapter 5. And without having heard how chapter 5 ended in terms of the teaching from last week, I wanted to just take a risk and go back to verse 25 and 26 for a moment as we start into chapter 6, because the flow of thought, I think, really goes with this phrase, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. And certainly that's a statement about how the Holy Spirit works in our lives, but the Spirit here is also the Spirit of the gospel, which the whole book and letter has been about. And then he says, let us not become conceited in provoking and envying one another. And the flow of thought from verse 25 of chapter 5 all the way through the end of chapter 6 is really about living with the freedom of the Spirit, in step with the Spirit, or living in a sense, a gospel-healed life. And I want to suggest that there are 5 walkways, that there's a ditch on either side, and the gospel approach is to avoid the 2 ditches. There's a famous trail in Zion National Park called the Bright Angel Trail, and you walk up it, and on either side there's a huge fall off. And maybe that's Grand Canyon. It's one of those. It's not in the Grand Canyon. It's in Zion, but I may have the trail name wrong. But my point is that there's this huge fall off, and that's what we see here. And here, the way that we fall off is provoking or envying. He says, "Let us not become conceited, provoking or envying one another." So conceit, pride, shows up in provoking or in envying, the 2 ditches. A gospel-healed approach, or a in step with the Spirit approach, is the way of humility. Provoking here is the Greek word parakaleo, and it means to challenge or contend, to show superiority. So pride either shows itself in trying to assert ourselves to be better than somebody, which, if you're not very socially aware, you do this in blatant displays of pride, just saying, look at what I do or have achieved. If you're a little more socially advanced, you find subtle ways to do it. Or in envying, meaning that we say, I'm not as good as, I wish I could have what they have, I deserve. And neither of those is ultimately the gospel in terms of how that lives. Here are just a few ways that people have described this. John Stott, in writing about it, said this. He said, what the apostle writes here is entirely true to our own experience. Generally speaking, we adopt towards each other one of these 2 attitudes. We are motivated by feelings either of inferiority or superiority. If we regard ourselves as superior to other people, we challenge them, for we want them to know and feel our superiority. If, on the other hand, we regard them as superior to us, we envy them. In both cases, our attitude is due to vainglory or conceit, to our loving and having such a fantasy opinion of ourselves that we cannot bear any rivals. Tim Keller said it this way. He said, the gospel creates a whole new self-image in which it is not based on comparison with others. Only the gospel makes us neither self-confident nor self-disdaining, but both bold and humble. And then C.S. Lewis, in writing about this, puts it this way. Pride is essentially competitive. It gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next person. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good-looking, but they are not. They are proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. It's the pleasure of being above all the rest, and that is what pride is, and what gospel humility or gospel pathway is not either envying or provoking, being better than. It's not about comparison, but seeing ourselves how Jesus sees us and receiving his assessment of us. And this is what the book of Galatians is all about. And chapter 6 shows how we can live with this gospel-healed kind of life, or be in step with the Spirit.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.